Hey there, I'm Rachel Blevins, and you're watching Just Press Play, the show that brings you in-depth reports, exclusive interviews, and controversial issues you may have missed this week on RT America. On this week's episode, In Question discusses the influence of a mysterious Swiss billionaire who is fueling millions of dollars in dark money to the Democratic Party. Plus, The World According to Jesse takes a look at the new $2 billion gift to the Biden administration in its ongoing mission to counter China at sea. Then, Boom Bust has the latest on the new powers given to the IRS in its fight to find out just how much you made off of cryptocurrencies this year. Let's get started.
We are first to bring you this story tonight.
Billionaire entrepreneur Kevin O'Leary is known for his time as Mr. Wonderful on the hit show Shark Tank, where he shares his love of making money and appreciating a nice glass of wine. But like every investor, he had to start somewhere. Well, this week on Dennis Miller Plus One, O'Leary shared how the advice his late mother gave him early on still plays a role in his career today.
Well, my stepdad lives in Switzerland, and he's really was into wines when I was a teenager, and he started teaching me about the different varietals, Burgundies, Bordeaux, the DRC region, the Italians, you know, the Cabernet, Moscato, all of these different, and I just learned, in Europe, people aren't as uptight. You know, kids drink wine watered down with water when they're 7 years old. That's just how they do it in Switzerland. And so you learn early on, and I learned how to blend wine. And so, you know, I finally, when I was very fortunate, I started investing in vineyards. And the best way to turn yourself into a poor guy is to invest in the wine business, because there's 3 tiers of distribution. And then along came the laws changing about 6 years ago, where you can ship from your winery in California to 42 states direct. And that changed everything for me, because the whole Shark Tank thing, I became the wine guy. And now I could go online and say, look, I've selected, you know, these 12 wines for you that I blended myself. I've won 5 awards or 10 awards, because I have. And we started selling direct. And that business is huge today. I ship 150,000 cases a year.
Wow. And fun, too. And what a perfect staging ground you had parentally. So your stepfather gives you an Ian Fleming sort of cachet. And then your mother, I love the advice earlier. It's one of the truest things you can say to a kid. Who wants to go through life juggling all these balls, trying to figure out which story you told who? You tell the truth, and your head hits the pillow and you can sleep. Your mother was also very smart in economic affairs, right?
Yeah, she actually sort of gave me my investment philosophy. She used to take 20% of her salary when she was in, you know, her early 20s and put it into the stock market, dividend-paying stocks. And she had that portfolio, a secret portfolio from both of her husbands. She was married twice, and you can't do that today, but she pulled it off in those days in the late 50s. And when she died, I got a call from the executor. I was the older brother. And he said, you got to come down here. Your mother died a really wealthy woman. So this portfolio of telco bonds and S&P stocks for 55 years, I always wondered how she had all this money around all the time. And that's what it was. And so I went and looked at that and said, I'm going to do the same thing. You know, you stash a little bit away of what you make each week. When I was young, I was doing that, put it in the market. An average goes up like 7-8% a year, and you just leave it alone. Magic happens. That's how it works.
It's no secret that big money plays a significant role in politics. And here in the U.S., the mainstream media typically claims that foreign interference is frowned upon. But what about when a mysterious Swiss billionaire is donating hundreds of millions of dollars to a political party in secret? Well, to that, they don't have much to say at all. This week on In Question, George Galloway, Dee Watkins, and Ed Martin discuss the real influence of dark money in U.S. politics and why it isn't being talked about.
A narrative machine, the great American narrative machine, which is big tech, big media, and big government, rehashed the Russia hoax. There's a judge who says, oh my gosh, it's still there. The Mueller report is something special. It's one of the greatest hoaxes perpetrated on the American people, but very effectively done. Meanwhile, we find out that this Swiss citizen, maybe he's American, nobody knows, spent hundreds of millions of dollars. Look, here's where left and right can come together. Dark money in politics needs to be shined by the light of day. But here's where my colleague just said, as long as we get rid of Trump, I'm not sure right now that we're not in danger of losing this republic. What we have, the Democrats bragged after the last election about fortifying the election with tens of millions of dollars, dark money, where they went in and they changed the rules. Most of the time, it looks like, at least that they admitted, that it was legal, but it wasn't. It was dark money. It was foreign money. It was foreign influence. And now we're just getting to the tip of the iceberg. The big lie from Joe Biden is that he didn't know anything about all this stuff. This is an outrage. It should sink his presidency. But watch the narrative machine move on to the next thing and just kind of roll their eyes. And we'll talk about Joe Biden picking dandelions for his wife. It's outrageous.
Well, George, when you think of the Swiss, you think neutral, right? And though Mr. Hans-Jörg Weiss doesn't represent the Swiss government, he clearly is not neutral and has objectives here in supporting one party in the U.S. over the other. Do you think there's more than meets the eye here, that it's not just a wealthy Swiss immigrant donating money to push causes important to him? Can it be just that?
Well, when I think of Switzerland, I think of the sweetest of desserts, which we call a Swiss roll. And this is one gigantic Swiss roll. A Swiss roll in your election, which was dominated by false allegations of Russian interference. Turns out that there were European countries interfering in your politics. It just wasn't Russia. Full marks, I must say, to the New York Times, not my favorite publication. This is a cracking piece of investigative journalism, and it should bring the house down, as Ed just said. But we'll see if it does. By the way, it is perfectly possible that Joe Biden didn't know anything about any of this, because he doesn't even know that you shouldn't really pick dandelions, of all things, and hand them to your wife in public.
Tensions between the U.S. and China continue to rise as the Biden administration carries on the same policies that were championed by former President Trump. But when Biden came into office, he was given the gift of a $2.2 billion military program specifically aimed at countering China. This week on The World According to Jesse, host of the Congressional Dish, Jen Briney, explained what's really included in this program and if it could lead to more than just a trade war between the world's two largest economies.
Indo-Pacific Deterrence Initiative is a new military buildup, so a new pre-positioning of the United States military west of the international date line, which is basically China's neighborhood. And specifically, it's going to increase the number of troops we have in that area, along with equipment, weapons, and fuel. And then on top of that, the military is going to conduct training exercises to make it easier for other militaries to partner with us in war in that part of the world.
Now, what are some of the ways we are deterring China in the Pacific? And what are we deterring them from?
Well, China's increasing the strength of its own military and has expanded its own presence in the South China Sea to the point that they're building brand new islands and putting military bases on top of them. And so it takes weeks to move U.S. aircraft carriers from Alaska and other U.S. territories into China's neighborhood. And so the idea behind this is that by having our troops and equipment already there, we'd be able to wage war faster if needed. And as for what we're deterring, our military commanders told Congress that they're most concerned that China is going to use violence to take control over Taiwan. And then also, in reality, we're also doing this to protect the shipping lanes used by multinational corporations.
Now, what is the ultimate goal here?
Well, big picture, China's threatening the dominance of the global systems of laws, especially economic laws, that the U.S. and our partners have been trying to implement worldwide since the end of World War II. So our government basically wants China and Russia and all countries on Earth to follow the rules of the system that the U.S. leads. In particular, we want them to adhere to the rules dictated by the World Trade Organization and its partner organizations.
Now, is this just simply a new Cold War?
You know, I hesitate to use that term because it conjures up images of nuclear war. to describe this because what's happening now is a battle of economic systems. And so despite the increased military presence on both sides, there are areas where the US and the Chinese are cooperating. So our administration just conducted an apparently friendly meeting about climate change, for example, with the Chinese. And so even though I think this military buildup situation deserves our awareness and attention, I think what's happening is more of an economic Cold War, if it can be classified as one at all.
Now, is China a real threat to the U.S.? Don't we trade with them, and doesn't our economy truly rely on China's manufacturing?
Well, let me put it this way. I'm not losing 1 second of sleep thinking that China's about to attack my neighborhood, because we certainly do trade with China, and China is a member of the World Trade Organization. They have been since 2001.
Immigration reform. It's a politically charged topic that is often seen as a partisan issue, despite the effect it has on men, women, and children of all ages. The Biden administration now claims it is working overtime to fix what it calls a totally broken system, as it faces scrutiny over its own treatment of migrants seeking asylum. This week on Watching the Hawks, attorney Allen Orr explained why the Biden administration still has a long way to go to obtain the progress it is promising on immigration.
What are you going to do about it is the real question, and how are you going to fix it? And a success story for them is that actually they're 82% down on the immigrants that they were holding at the southern border. But the problem remains of the high impact of deportations that they're doing to Black immigrants across the board, specifically Haitians, when Haiti is in a turmoil at this time and place. So we're looking for the Biden administration to sort of step up and do exactly what they said they would do, which is return America to a humane system. And while today you've heard that they've increased the number of refugees back to the original number that he said during the campaign, America still accepts less immigrants, overall refugees and regular green card holders, than almost half of the most powerful, biggest nations or nations smaller than us in the world, less than Switzerland, less than Australia, less than Canada. So it's time for us to really step into the new generation and start accepting migrants to start rebuilding the United States.
Allen, what do you feel are some of the reasons why we're seeing growing numbers of migrants at the border, and what can the Biden administration do to combat or slow the surge?
Right. So I think calling it a surge might not be the best way to portray it, but I understand that's the way the media sees it, and it seems like an influx, but it's always happened this way. One of the best ways to do it is exactly what the vice president is doing, which is trying to stabilize the region. But as we understand that climate change, even in the United States, we're seeing strange weathers right now in Georgia, are causing people to move from where they are, as well as food shortages, as well as work shortages. So the best solution would be, if there were a legal path for these individuals to come in, to work, and then return, then that would be fine. Because right now what we see is there are a lot of jobs that are going vacant in fields, in farmland, in hotel cleaning, because Americans feel as if that's not the work they want to do at this time and place. And we need immigrants to sort of come in and fill that back labor, as well as we need immigrants on the top end to do teaching to our students, as well as the development that we've seen happen over again with tech companies such as Google and Apple to sort of pull our infrastructure back in. Keeping people out or keeping immigrants out only means you're keeping the global production out of the United States, and other things are going to happen in other places like Canada.
And Allen, what are some of the administration's plans to advance comprehensive immigration reform like you just spoke of? We heard a few weeks ago that Biden placed Vice President Kamala Harris at the forefront of curbing immigration and unaccompanied children. Can a diplomatic, anti-poverty, and international development lens help border security and enforcement?
Yeah, so I think we're looking at it. This has always been the game with the Republican Party to talk about enforcement when we're really talking about immigration. And if you remove the concept of thinking of someone other as a threat, then you really don't have that security or threat, because really someone who walked 1,000 miles is not really an infrastructure threat to the United States, or people who are sort of looking for food or to reunite their families.
We'll be back with more of Just Press Play right after this. Welcome back. I'm Rachel Blevins, and you're watching Just Press Play. President Biden has been widely praised by the media from the day he stepped into office. Some have even suggested that given all of the reforms Biden is proposing, he could be the new FDR, comparing his plans to the New Deal of the 1930s. But on this week's episode of On Contact, Professor Paul Street noted that the New Deal wasn't simply enacted because of the leader of the time. He explains why it took masses of people coming together to fight for change before it was finally achieved.
But we're going to find out if I can do it because we're going to find out if he has that schmooze factor. That's what he said, you know, to bend people's arms in Congress because that's how stuff gets done. We want to look back at the 30s and the New Deal and how they happened. They happened because there was thunder on the left. There was dissent in the streets right before the Social Security Act and the Wagner Act, probably the two key progressive linchpin measures. Far from perfect, and they excluded much of the minority and black population from their coverage, incidentally. We should not romanticize the New Deal, but they were breakthrough pieces of legislation for much of the working class population, old age pensions and the legalization of union organizing and collective bargaining. The year before those happened, there was a gigantic longshoreman strike all across the Western coast. There was a general strike led by Trotskyist Teamsters in the Twin Cities. There was a national textile strike. There were hunger marches from coast to coast. And every major city in this country had a resurgent left. Up in the Twin Cities, it was often syndicalist, IWW, and Trotskyist. In Chicago and Detroit, it was communist. Probably the dominant tendency was the Communist Party. A lot of issues with the Communist Party, but also a lot of great organizers. And they were on the ground and they were present. And when there were issues in a city like Chicago and people got evicted because they couldn't pay their rent because they'd lost their jobs and the cops would come and evict them, a black woman on the South Side would say, quick, go get the Reds. And people knew where they were and they went and got them. And the Reds came with loudspeakers and organized a mass resistance, and this was true all over America. And this thunder on the left shows up in the congressional debates that lead to the passage of a lot of the progressive legislation in the mid-30s. If we don't do this, then we're going to get revolution. And of course, there's a Soviet Union at the time, and there's fear of revolution elsewhere in the country. There's a global kind of sense of the threat of the left. And that's not happening now. That's always been one sort of kind of thing missing. You know, another piece that's missing historically, too, is what the late political economist Giovanni Arrighi called workplace bargaining power. There were these remarkable capital-intensive industries. They could be shut down. They could be crippled by a stoppage in a body plant in Flint, Michigan, or in the Chicago packing houses at an Armour or a Swift plant. A bunch of left militant black workers could stop the killing floor, and a huge, whole, gigantic 10,000 worker plant would go down. The whole continuous flow of production.
Rising sea levels and shrinking coastlines. That's the grim reality increasing temperatures have brought upon Hawaii, which became the first state to declare a climate emergency that shows just how dire the situation is growing. This week on America's Lawyer, RT's Brigida Santos explained how state and federal lawmakers are taking steps to meet the worsening climate crisis head on.
State Senate Concurrent Resolution 44 declares that climate change is a threat to the environment and humans and requests statewide cooperation in addressing the adverse effects of climate change, including rising sea levels and the global temperature, coastal erosion, and protecting critical infrastructure. While the resolution is largely symbolic, it also calls on Hawaii's government to prohibit private investment and public subsidies in projects that exacerbate climate change, like coal, oil, gas, or tree burning. It also calls on the government to promote policies and infrastructure to replace fossil fuels with solar, wind, or battery storage by 2030. The state is taking action based on global scientific evidence and its own climate problems.
Yeah, it's a non-binding resolution, but at least they're doing something to get out there and say we're paying attention to it. Our beaches are eroding. We have sea levels that are rising. Our infrastructure is at risk. And we have to do something, even though the feds aren't doing what they need to do. We need to do something on our own. How has climate change impacted Hawaii besides you know, besides the fact that right now they see their islands disappearing from erosion.
Yeah, well, climate change has led to more droughts on Hawaii's islands, which greatly impact indigenous communities, deteriorate freshwater streams and rivers, and reduce access to water. Rising sea levels have resulted in long-term coastal erosion to 70% of the beaches in Kauai, Oahu, and Maui. Local governments on several islands had already previously declared climate emergencies back in 2019, but the new statewide declaration now acknowledges the urgency of this problem and aims to solve some of the most pressing issues.
You know, I'm wondering, Brigida, you seen any signs that other states are planning similar actions? You know, Florida comes to my mind, all the coastal states come to my mind. This would seem like a good idea. What have you followed on that?
Sure, many states in the U.S. are now regularly experiencing climate change-related catastrophes, from deep freezes to debilitating droughts, wildfires, hurricanes, and storms. At least 33 states have now released a climate action plan or have one in the works. And these plans typically set goals targeting greenhouse gas emissions or focus on shifting to renewable energy sources. But so far, Hawaii is the only U.S. state to declare an official climate emergency. Now, back in February, there was a House resolution introduced at the federal level to declare a national climate emergency, and the Biden administration has spoken about advancing climate policies at home and internationally. But we'll have to see how that plays out.
For the first time, a federal court has given the IRS permission to seek the identities of cryptocurrency users in a new way. They will be authorized to serve a John Doe summons in order to force a popular crypto exchange to turn over information on its users. This week on Boom Bust, Ben, Swann, and Christy discuss the dangerous precedent this ruling sets and why it highlights the importance of truly owning your crypto.
Essentially what they're saying to Kraken is turn over all of your information on these users, show us their financial history, show us what they've been doing, because they owe us money and we're coming to get that money. It's something, I gotta say it again, Rachel, I've been warning about this for a long time, that it's on its way, that the IRS will crack down. And unfortunately, I think there's a lot of crypto users who, if Kraken goes along with this, and I believe that they will, that ultimately that those users are going to be hurt tremendously by this because of the fact that the U.S. government can't figure out what crypto is, how to classify it, and so they just kind of jerk everyone around with these regulations. I think it's a very bad thing for these users, but if I were you, if you're on Kraken, you better start getting your tax stuff in order.
Yeah, and it may start on Kraken now, but it's going to start going around to other exchanges as the government figures out exactly what they're able to do, and maybe they'll figure out what cryptos are.
And it's also going to go to smaller crypto users. So those who are 20,000 and above, if you're sitting there and say, oh, I only had 5,000 or 10,000, I'm fine. You're not fine. They'll come get you eventually. They're just starting with the bigger numbers first.
Yeah, it's definitely a good warning for everyone to start getting aware of it. Now, Christy, I want to look at another update. We're hearing that according to Crypto Custody NYDIG, for the first time, customers of some U.S. banks will soon be able to buy, hold, and sell Bitcoin through their existing accounts. So what does that mean for the crypto space as a whole?
Well, this is pretty big news because for the first time, customers of these U.S. banks can actually buy and sell Bitcoin through their existing accounts, very similar to how they can sell equities through their current bank accounts. So banks are asking for Bitcoin now because they see that their customers are sending dollars to Coinbase and other crypto exchanges, such as PayPal, Venmo, all of the apps that now allow you to purchase cryptos. And they're losing out on major businesses and also at the same time losing deposits, which is basically the lifeblood of banking. So this is yet again another step towards mainstream adoption, and it's great for the masses. Banks have previously steered clear of Bitcoin, denouncing it, calling it a ginormous Ponzi scheme, advising clients against it, saying it's too volatile, too risky for all these retail clients. So now they're definitely eating their words and backtracking. So I guess, yay, it's another win for Bitcoin. But not really, because once again, anyone who uses this service is missing out on the entire point of Bitcoin, which is to bank yourself and to cut out the intermediary. Because at the end of the day, the bank is the one controlling your assets, limiting your withdrawals, monitoring what's going in and out, and putting freezes on your account for some fictitious reasons that they concocted because their reserves are getting low.
That's it for Just Press Play. I'm Rachel Blevins. To see more of the clips you just saw here, download the Portable TV app for your Apple or Android device. We'll see you here next week, and as always, don't forget to question more.